Okay, so get ready because today we're diving into a mystery that is both fascinating and absolutely chilling.
Oh, yeah.
The unsolved case of the Long Island serial killer.
Also known as the Gilgo Beach Killer.
Right. And you might have heard about this case, you know, just from the headlines, but trust me,
Oh, yeah.
we're going way beyond the headlines today.
Way
We're
beyond.
talking 10 to 16 victims,
Wow.
mostly young women found along this desolate stretch of Long Island shoreline.
It's desolate.
And this case has been unfolding for over a decade,
Over a decade.
starting way back in 2010.
Wow, so long.
So get ready for some twists and turns.
Oh, yeah.
Because we're going to go deep into the facts and the theories and what makes this case such a captivating puzzle.
Yeah, what is it about this case that is so captivating?
Well, I think part of it is how it all started.
Oh, yeah, how did it start?
So picture this December 2010, a seemingly routine training exercise near Gilgo Beach.
Okay.
Officer John Malia and his cadaver dog are out there, not expecting to uncover anything, really.
Just a normal day at the beach, right?
Yeah, except not really.
Not at all, though.
So the dog picks up a scent and leads them to something buried in the brush.
Oh, no.
And that's where the nightmare begins.
Oh, gosh.
They find human remains
Human remains.
wrapped in a burlap sack.
Oh, that's creepy.
The victim is later identified as Melissa Barthelemy, a 24-year-old woman who had been missing since July of the previous year.
Oh, wow.
And like many of the victims in this case, Melissa had been working as an escort and using Craigslist.
I see.
That detail about the burlap sack just sends chills down my spine.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
I mean, that level of premeditation, the way the killer went to such lengths to conceal the body,
Yeah.
it's disturbing.
It suggests a really calculated and methodical approach.
Totally.
And Melissa's case was really just the first domino to fall.
Oh, no.
Within months, authorities discovered 3 more bodies. All young women, all escorts, all found in burlap sacks, just like Melissa.
Oh, my gosh.
These 4 victims became known as the Gilgo Four. And it quickly became clear that this wasn't just a tragic coincidence.
Yeah.
They were dealing with a potential serial killer.
And as if the case wasn't already complex enough, things take an even darker turn in the spring of 2011.
Oh, really?
What happened? The search expands along Ocean Parkway, and the body count rises.
No.
Ultimately, they discover a total of 10 sets of remains scattered along that desolate stretch of coastline.
Wow.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The victims aren't all young women anymore.
Oh, really?
We're now talking about an unidentified toddler,
A toddler.
an unidentified Asian male,
Okay.
and a woman known only as Peaches because of a distinctive tattoo.
Peaches.
So we've got this sudden shift in the victim profile.
Right.
What does that tell us? Does it point to multiple killers or a single killer with a wider range of victims than initially thought?
Well, you see the shift from primarily young female escorts to a toddler, an Asian male, and Peaches significantly broadens the potential victim pool.
Yeah.
And this forces us to ask, did the killer's MO change? Was this a deliberate attempt at misdirection?
Oh.
Or are we indeed dealing with multiple killers using the same dumping ground?
Right.
It's a crucial question that investigators had to grapple with.
For sure. So at this point, we've got a lot of pieces of the puzzle,
Yeah.
but no clear picture yet.
Not yet.
What was the initial profile that emerged based on the early victims, those first 4 women?
Well, initially, most profilers leaned towards the single killer theory.
Okay.
They painted a picture of a highly organized individual,
Right?
someone familiar with the area, someone who knew how to move around undetected,
Okay.
and most likely a local.
Ah.
The choice of victims, mostly young women working as escorts, pointed towards what's known as a power control type killer.
Interesting.
These are individuals who prey on those they perceive as vulnerable,
Right?
often deriving a sense of power and control from their actions.
And this is where things get even more unsettling.
Oh, yeah.
Because the possibility of a killer with law enforcement ties started to surface. I remember reading about that and just feeling a shiver go down my spine.
Yeah, exactly. The killer's apparent understanding of police procedures
Okay.
and their ability to evade capture for so long fed into that speculation.
Right.
Some theorize that the killer might have even participated in or had knowledge of the investigations themselves.
Wow.
Now, it's important to emphasize that this was and still is a theory,
Right.
but it's a chilling thought nonetheless.
Absolutely. But you also mentioned alternative theories, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea that Gilgo Beach might have been a dumping ground for multiple killers.
Precisely as the case evolved and as the victim pool expanded, this theory gained traction.
I see.
The diverse victims and the way the bodies were spread out geographically lent credence to the idea that perhaps multiple individuals were using this isolated location to dispose of their victims.
Makes sense.
And sadly, history tells us that it's not unheard of for a location to attract more than one killer.
Right, so we've got these different theories swirling around.
Yeah.
But what about the forensic evidence?
Right.
What challenges were investigators facing in trying to piece together this complex puzzle?
Well, even with advances in DNA technology, this case presented unique hurdles.
Like what?
Well, many of the bodies had been exposed to the elements for extended periods, leading to significant decomposition.
Right.
And this made it incredibly difficult to extract usable DNA profiles.
So time was working against them in more ways than one.
Exactly.
Not only were potential leads going cold, but the evidence itself was deteriorating.
Exactly. And the passage of time further degraded any other forensic evidence that might have been present,
Right.
making it even harder to find reliable clues. This case really highlights the complexities of criminal investigations,
Yeah.
especially when dealing with outdoor crime scenes and extended time frames.
So for years, the case remained a frustrating stalemate.
It really was.
But then around 2020, things started to shift a bit.
They did.
There was talk about a new approach using genetic genealogy,
Yes.
a technique that had been successful in solving other cold cases, like the Golden State Killer.
Right. In 2020, the Suffolk County Police Department decided to revisit some of the evidence found at the crime scenes.
Okay.
They released a photo of a belt with distinctive initials, hoping someone might recognize it.
Oh, interesting.
And perhaps even more significantly, they turned to genetic genealogy, hoping for a breakthrough.
Now, for those who might not be familiar, could you explain a bit more about how genetic genealogy works?
Of course.
It sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
It might sound futuristic, but it's a powerful tool that's rooted in good old-fashioned family trees.
Okay.
Essentially, you take DNA from a crime scene, compare it to those public genealogy databases,
Right.
and look for potential familial matches.
Okay.
Then by building family trees backward,
Uh-huh.
you can narrow down potential suspects.
Wow.
It's a brilliant technique, but it's not a quick fix.
So did this new approach finally crack the case wide open?
Well, while genetic genealogy has been a game changer in other cases, it hasn't, unfortunately, led to a definitive breakthrough in the Long Island serial killer case as of yet.
Oh.
It's still an ongoing process.
I can only imagine the frustration and heartache the victims' families must be going through,
Oh, absolutely.
waiting all these years for answers.
Yeah,
It's heartbreaking.
absolutely. The impact of this case on the families and the community as a whole is profound.
Right.
This isn't just about solving a crime. It's about bringing peace and closure to those who've lost loved ones.
For sure.
And it's important to remember, this case goes way beyond the victims and their families. You know, it's a harsh spotlight on some big societal issues.
Oh, for sure. So we're not just talking about catching a killer.
No.
We're talking about systemic issues
Yes.
that put certain groups at much greater risk.
Exactly.
So tell me more about that.
Well, it's highlighted the vulnerability of people in high-risk professions,
Okay.
particularly sex work. You know,
Oh.
remember, many of the victims in this case were escorts who advertised online.
Right.
And this tragedy has really sparked conversations about safety measures and support systems for people in similar situations.
For sure.
It's about advocating for their rights and their well-being,
Absolutely.
you know?
Everyone deserves to feel safe,
Yes, they do.
regardless of their profession.
Absolutely.
And it's tragic that it takes a case like this to bring these issues to light.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this case has also exposed just how challenging, you know, these complex multi-jurisdictional investigations can be
Right.
when you have crimes that might span different areas.
Yeah.
Getting various law enforcement agencies to coordinate effectively can be a logistical nightmare.
I imagine it's like herding cats.
It can be.
So many moving parts and so much potential for things to just slip through the cracks.
Unfortunately, yes, efficient communication and collaboration between those agencies is absolutely crucial in these kinds of investigations.
So here we are over a decade later, and the Long Island serial killer case remains unsolved.
It does.
What's the status of the investigation now?
Well, the case is still active, but progress has been slow. Despite the extensive media coverage, the numerous tips that have poured in, and all the advancements in forensic techniques, investigators still haven't been able to definitively identify a suspect.
It feels like this case is just shrouded in this perpetual fog.
It does, doesn't it?
And you mentioned media coverage. It's been pretty intense over the years, hasn't it?
Oh, it has.
Yeah.
This case has captivated the public's imagination like few others have, and there have been countless documentaries, podcasts, news specials, all trying to unravel the mystery.
For sure.
And while that kind of attention can be helpful, for generating leads,
Right.
it can also lead to the spread of misinformation, which can really complicate the investigation.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
They need the public's help,
They do.
but they also have to manage the flow of information so carefully.
Exactly. It's a delicate balancing act.
Something that always gets to me about this case is the sheer horror of those initial discoveries. Can you imagine being that officer stumbling upon those burlap sacks?
It must have been a deeply disturbing experience, and it speaks volumes about the killer's calculated and methodical nature, the way the bodies were concealed.
Right.
It wasn't simply about disposing of them. It was about hiding them, delaying their discovery.
Right.
It adds another layer of chilling premeditation.
Yeah. And the choice of location, Gilgo Beach.
Yes.
So isolated and desolate. Even before I knew about this case, that stretch of coastline always seemed kind of eerie to me.
Well, the location itself almost becomes another character in this story.
Totally.
It's not just a backdrop, it's a clue. It points to someone who knew the area well, someone who felt comfortable operating in that environment, someone who might even blend in.
It's almost like the killer was taunting the authorities,
It could be.
daring them to find the bodies in this vast, unforgiving landscape.
It's a fascinating interpretation. It definitely adds another layer to the psychological complexity of the case. It leaves us wondering, what was the killer's motivation? Was it purely about power and control, or was there something deeper, something more sinister at play?
I think those are questions that haunt anyone who looks into this case, investigators, the public alike. The Long Island serial killer case is just this stark reminder that some mysteries just might never be fully solved.
That is a sobering thought. But, even without all the answers, these cases can teach us a lot.
In what way?
Well, they force us to confront the darker aspects of human nature and to examine how well our systems protect the vulnerable.
That's a really good point. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Long Island serial killer case, what are some key takeaways you'd leave our listener with?
I think it's crucial to acknowledge the lasting impact this case has had, not just on the victims' families, but on our collective understanding of criminal behavior and the challenges of modern investigations.
Yeah.
It's a story that continues to unfold.
It has.
And even if we never uncover all the answers, the pursuit of justice must never stop.
It's interesting. We've covered so much ground already, and I still feel like we've only scratched the surface of this case.
Oh, absolutely. The Long Island serial killer case is like an onion, layers upon layers of complexity and intrigue.
Right.
Just when you think you're getting close to the core, you peel back another layer and the mystery deepens.
Exactly. And speaking of layers, we talked about the forensic challenges in this case.
Yeah.
The elements, the decomposition.
Yeah.
Seems like time was a major obstacle for investigators.
Absolutely. Time was not on their side at all. But it wasn't just the degradation of physical evidence either.
Right.
You also have the fading of memories and the changing landscapes, people moving away.
Yeah.
All those factors just complicate cold cases.
It makes you wonder, what if this had happened in the age of, smartphones and ubiquitous surveillance cameras?
Right.
Would it have been solved by now?
It's a fascinating question. Technology has revolutionized criminal investigations for sure.
Yeah.
But even with all the advancements we've seen, human behavior remains unpredictable.
Right.
And that's what makes these cases so difficult to crack.
So let's circle back to the theories for a moment. We talked about the single killer theory,
Right.
the possibility of multiple killers, and that unsettling idea of a killer with law enforcement ties.
Yeah.
For you, is there one theory that stands out as more plausible than the others?
It's tempting to pick a favorite, but I really try to approach these cases with a totally open mind.
Sure.
Each theory has its merits and its flaws. The single killer theory initially seemed like the most straightforward explanation.
Yeah.
Especially given the similarities in the early victims and the apparent familiarity with the area.
Right, that idea of a local who knew the terrain, who could move around undetected.
Exactly.
It makes sense.
It does, but then we have that shift in the victim profile.
Right.
It's not just young women anymore.
Right.
Suddenly you have the toddler, the Asian male Peaches. It just broadens the scope dramatically.
So did the killer's MO evolve, or is this where the multiple killers theory starts to gain more traction.
It's certainly a possibility. And then, of course, you have the theory about a killer with law enforcement ties. It's a theory that often emerges in these cases with extended time frames and apparent investigative roadblocks.
It's chilling, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. I mean, we've seen it happen before in other cases.
Exactly. But it's important to emphasize that at this point, it's just that it's a theory. There's no concrete evidence to support it.
And that brings us back to the mystery at the heart of it all. What really happened?
Yeah.
Who is the Long Island serial killer?
Right.
I always like to ask our listeners this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
What theories resonate with you and why?
I think that's the beauty and the frustration of unsolved mysteries.
Yeah.
They invite us to become armchair detectives, to weigh the evidence, to draw our own conclusion.
It's a mental workout for sure.
It is.
And speaking of workouts, before we wrap up, I have to ask about that new development in the case.
Oh, yes.
Just last week, there were reports of a possible connection to the unsolved Gilgo Beach murders and Rex Horderman,
Yes.
the architect recently charged with the murders of 3 women in Suffolk County.
Right. That news certainly sent shockwaves through the true crime community.
For sure. It's too early to say conclusively whether Horderman is connected to the Gilgo Beach case. But investigators are looking into any possible links.
They are.
They're examining his past, his travels, anything that might connect him to the unsolved murders.
Right. It's an ongoing investigation.
It would be a huge break in the case, couldn't it? After all these years, the families of the victims might finally get some answers.
We can only hope. But it's important to remember that these investigations take time.
They do.
We need to let law enforcement do their work and gather the evidence they need.
Well, I, for one, will be following this case very closely.
Me too.
It's been a long and winding road, but perhaps we're finally nearing a resolution. What do you think, listener? Are we on the cusp of uncovering the truth behind the Long Island serial killer? The Long Island serial killer case is a stark reminder of the dark side of human nature, and how even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, the pursuit of justice should never be abandoned. And with that, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the chilling case of the Long Island serial killer. We hope you found this exploration informative and thought-provoking. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe